Let me tell you something about the Evil Dead franchise that most people completely miss. Every single time it should have died, it came back nastier, louder, and more unhinged than before. A group of broke college kids film a horror movie in a Tennessee cabin with $90,000 and a camera on a plank of wood. That movie gets banned in multiple countries for being too violent. A decade later, the same guys come back and make a sequel that is basically a Looney Tunes cartoon covered in blood. Then they make a third one where the main guy fights skeletons in medieval England. Then they sit out for 20 years, come back with one of the most brutal reboots in horror history, do it again with a story set in an apartment building, and now in 2026 they are switching genres entirely. This is a franchise that has never once played by the rules it set for itself. And Evil Dead Burn looks like it is about to do it again, in a way that nobody expected. So today we are going to go deep on this. We are talking about where this franchise came from, why every single shift in tone actually worked, what Evil Dead Burn appears to be doing differently, why action horror as a genre has historically been a graveyard for good ideas, and why this particular film might actually pull it off where so many others failed. Get comfortable, this one is going to take a while. The year is 1978. Sam Raimi is studying literature at Michigan State University. His friend Rob Tapert is finishing an economics degree. Bruce Campbell has just quit his job driving a taxi. None of them have any money, none of them have any real film experience, and all three of them are absolutely terrified of ending up in ordinary jobs for the rest of their lives. So they do the only logical thing. They decide to make a horror movie. They study the market first. They go to cheap double features, sit in the back, watch what makes audiences react, and take notes. The conclusion they reach is simple. Keep the pace relentless, and once the horror starts, do not let it stop. The gorier, the better. They make a short film called Within the Woods. It is rough, very rough, but it is enough to raise $90,000 from investors, and that becomes The Evil Dead. The Evil Dead is shot in a remote Tennessee cabin under conditions that Bruce Campbell has described as genuinely horrible. The crew lived in the cabin. The fake blood was corn syrup and food coloring, and it got everywhere, all the time, in all the food. The camera rigs they built were improvised. The schedule was brutal, and the result was a film that played like a nightmare that did not know how to end. It is relentless in a way that feels almost accidental. There is no humor in it, no winking at the camera, no safety valve. It is just 5 kids in a cabin and then an unrelenting series of extremely bad things happening to them. The demon possession sequences are genuinely disturbing, the pacing is suffocating, and the ending gives you no comfort at all. When it finally got released in the UK on home video, the British government actually came for it. It ended up on a list called the Video Nasties, a collection of films deemed too violent and obscene for public consumption. Sam Raimi flew to England to testify in defense of his own movie. A judge turned him away. The charges were eventually dismissed, but the point stands. This was a film that genuinely alarmed people in power. That is the foundation, pure, nasty, uncompromising horror, no jokes, no safety net, just the Necronomicon, some demons, and a lot of suffering. And then the sequel threw all of that completely out the window. Here is the thing about Evil Dead II that people forget when they talk about tonal consistency in horror franchises. Evil Dead II is not a sequel in any traditional sense. It is more of a remake that forgot to take itself seriously, and that is entirely intentional. After the underwhelming box office performance of his second film Crime Wave, Raimi came back to the world he knew best. But the legal situation with the original Evil Dead meant he had to reshoot the setup from scratch, and while he was at it, he completely changed the DNA of the thing. Evil Dead II is closer to Tex Avery cartoon than it is to Dario Argento. The slapstick is deliberate and extreme. There's a scene where Ash's own hand becomes possessed and he has to fight it, culminating in him cutting it off with a chainsaw while cracking one-liners. There is a sequence where the dismembered hand crawls around the cabin and Ash chases it, and it is staged like a comedy bit from a silent film. The blood is still everywhere, the horror is still present, but the whole thing has this absurd, almost gleeful quality that makes you laugh even when you probably should not be laughing. Critics at the time were confused. Audiences did not quite know what to do with it either. But over the years, Evil Dead II became the film most people point to as the best in the franchise. It has a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. It is the one that made Bruce Campbell a cult icon. And then Army of Darkness took things even further left. Army of Darkness is essentially a medieval action-adventure movie that happens to have some horror elements. Ash gets transported back to 1300 AD, fights an army of skeleton warriors, delivers lines like he's auditioning for a role in a comic book, and the whole thing plays more like a bloodier Indiana Jones film than anything resembling the original 1981 movie. The horror is almost gone entirely. What remains is spectacle, comedy, and Campbell doing what Campbell does best, which is playing a man who is simultaneously the most capable and most ridiculous person in any room he walks into. The franchise was already doing genre experiments. Army of Darkness proved that the brand could survive a complete departure from its origins. And then it went quiet for a long time. 2 decades pass, horror moves on. And then in 2013, director Fede Alvarez brings Evil Dead back, and he goes in completely the opposite direction from where Raimi left off. No comedy, no winking, no self-awareness. Just a maximally brutal horror film that takes the original Cabin premise and makes it even darker and more suffocating than the 1981 version. Alvarez once described his goal as making the most disturbing film he could. He largely succeeded. The 2013 Evil Dead has some of the most viscerally uncomfortable scenes in mainstream horror. It was a genuine reset of the franchise's horror credentials. And it worked. Critics responded well. Audiences responded even better. It made well over $90 million on a $4 million budget and proved that the Evil Dead name still carried real weight. Then Lee Cronin arrives for 2023's Evil Dead Rise, and again the formula shifts. Cronin takes the setting out of the woods entirely and drops it into an inner-city apartment building. He fuses the raw brutality of Alvarez's film with the dark comedy energy of Raimi's sequels. The result is something genuinely new in the franchise. It is scary and funny and deeply upsetting, sometimes all in the same scene. A woman possessed by a deadite taunts her own children with the kind of specific cruelty that lingers after the film is over. The elevator sequence, the cheese grater. If you have seen it, you know exactly what I mean. Evil Dead Rise made $147 million worldwide. That number matters. It means this franchise is not just surviving on nostalgia. It is genuinely bringing in new audiences. Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, and producer Rob Tapert took note and immediately more entries, aiming to release a new film roughly every 2 years. That is the plan. Keep it moving, keep it changing, never repeat yourself. Which brings us to Evil Dead Burn. Sebastien Vanicek is French. He is relatively young in the film industry, and his only prior feature is a 2023 horror film called Infested, or Vermins as it was titled in France. Infested is a film about a guy who brings a rare spider back to his apartment building in Paris, and things go exactly as badly as that sentence implies. The setting is a cramped, low-income housing project. The cast is mostly unknown. The budget is tiny, and the film is genuinely terrifying in a way that big studio horror rarely manages. Stephen King praised it. Critics called it an effective, accomplished creature feature debut. Shudder bought it for North America, and it became an instant word-of-mouth hit in horror circles. Sam Raimi saw it and immediately thought Vanicek was the right person for Evil Dead Burn. That connection actually makes a lot of sense when you look at both films. Infested uses a confined environment, a diverse ensemble cast, constant physical threat, and a relentless pace that never lets up. Evil Dead Rise used those same ingredients. Vanicek understands how to make a group of people feel genuinely trapped and endangered in a contained space, and he knows how to make physical horror feel immediate and real rather than staged. What Vanicek has said publicly about Evil Dead Burn is worth paying attention to. He told Variety that he wants people to feel physically drained when they leave the theater. He said he wants to create a visceral, sensory experience that punches the audience in the gut. He told the studio he wanted to make a film that hurts. And in a separate interview, he added something that should get us very interested. He said he told the studio he wanted to make a nasty film, a film that tests you, and that if he had not ruined his career by the end of it, he would move on to something other than horror. That is either a joke or a warning. Either way, it does not sound like a man making safe choices. The full trailer for Evil Dead Burn dropped at CinemaCon in April 2026, and what it shows is genuinely surprising. The plot involves a woman who loses her husband and goes to stay with her in-laws for comfort. That family gathering becomes something considerably worse when the Deadites start showing up. That part is classic Evil Dead territory. Grief, family, isolation, and then demonic possession turning everything inside out. But then the trailer shifts into something the franchise has not really done before. There are fight sequences with real choreography in them. Bodies crashing through walls, a car chase, a boat chase, a Deadite running across rooftops. There is a moment where a Deadite runs straight up a bathroom ceiling like it is completely normal. And there are hand-to-hand combat sequences that look like they belong in a John Wick production rather than a supernatural horror film. This is action horror, full stop, not horror with some action in it. Not a scary film where the characters occasionally run and fight. Action horror where the kinetic choreography is as central to the experience as the scares themselves. The franchise has never done this, not in this direct way. Army of Darkness had action-adjacent elements, but that was comedy first and adventure second. Evil Dead Burn, based on what the trailer shows, is putting action and horror on equal footing. And that is genuinely risky territory for reasons that have nothing to do with whether Vanicek can pull it off. Let me walk you through the graveyard of action horror movies for a moment, because it is instructive. The early 2000s were the peak era of this subgenre. Studios were chasing the success of films like The Matrix and trying to marry that kinetic visual style with horror concepts. The results were, with a few notable exceptions, pretty bad. 13 Ghosts, House of the Dead, Doom, Van Helsing, Underworld, Alone in the Dark, Priest, the original Resident Evil films, the list goes on. Critics came for all of them, and the criticism was almost always the same complaint. When you split a horror film's energy between building dread and staging action sequences, the dread loses. Action requires movement, momentum, and clarity. Horror requires stillness, uncertainty, and the sense that something bad could come from any direction at any moment. These two things are genuinely in tension with each other. Choreographed fights, by definition, have structure and rhythm. Real fear, by definition, is the absence of structure. There is a reason that the scariest moments in horror films are usually the quiet ones. The slow pan, the thing you almost see in the background, the silence before something moves. Action set pieces are the opposite of all of that. They are loud, fast, and structured. They tell you where to look. So the question for Evil Dead Burn is whether Vanicek has found a way to have both. To stage sequences that are physically thrilling and still keep the underlying horror intact. To let the action sequences serve the fear rather than replace it. The early signs suggest he might have. The trailer includes a deadite slowly swallowing hot candle wax with a smile. It includes a finger being severed in a way that makes you wince. The family setting gives the deadite possessions a personal, intimate cruelty that the action sequences do not override. And Vanicek has talked specifically about not letting the horror get diluted by the scale. The franchise has also, it is worth noting, survived every previous tonal shift without losing its critical standing. Every single entry in this series has been reasonably well received despite the enormous differences between them. That track record is not a guarantee, but it is not nothing either. There is a broader conversation happening in horror right now that Evil Dead Burn is sitting right in the middle of. Zach Kreger, the director of Barbarian, is currently working on a Resident Evil reboot. The screenplay is co-written by Shay Hatton, who wrote John Wick Chapter 3 and Army of Thieves. That is a horror filmmaker and an action writer working together on a horror IP, and early buzz suggests it looks like something genuinely interesting. The action-horror crossover is happening at multiple studios simultaneously. It is not a coincidence. The success of John Wick showed that audiences are hungry for films where the action is not just exciting but tactile and brutal in a way that crosses into uncomfortable territory. Evil Dead Burn appears to be operating in that same space, just with supernatural horror layered on top. Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell have also been public about the fact that they want to keep this franchise active for the foreseeable future. Evil Dead Wrath, directed by Francis Gallopy, is already in production and targeting a 2028 release. The plan is clearly to build something ongoing, almost like a horror anthology with a shared mythology. Each film gets its own director, its own tone, its own genre approach, but all of them share the Necronomicon and the Deadites. That model, if it holds, is genuinely interesting. You end up with a franchise where the only rule is that there are no rules except for the core mythology. Want to make a siege horror? Evil Dead 2013. Want dark comedy urban horror? Evil Dead Rise. Want action horror? Evil Dead Burn. The Deadites are flexible enough to fit almost any genre framework. And honestly, that flexibility is what has kept this franchise alive for 45 years when most horror franchises burn out after 2 or 3 entries. Evil Dead Burn hits theaters on July 10, 2026. It is the 6th film in a franchise that started with $90,000, a cabin in Tennessee, and 3 guys who were terrified of ordinary careers. It has been a video nasty, a slapstick comedy, a medieval adventure film, a brutal reboot, and an urban horror siege. And now it is an action horror film directed by a French filmmaker who made a spider movie and caught the attention of Sam Raimi. There is genuinely no other franchise in horror that looks and feels like this. Whether Evil Dead Burn succeeds or stumbles, it is at least attempting something. It is not retreating to safety. It is not giving you the same movie again with a different cast. It is swinging hard at something new the way every entry in this series has. If you have not seen Infested yet, I would genuinely recommend it before July. It will tell you a lot about what Vanicek brings to a contained horror scenario, and it will make you considerably more curious about what he does with a franchise that has no interest in staying in one place. Evil Dead is back, it is different again, And honestly, that is exactly how it should be.